So I just came across this lecture by David Harvey, who appears to be pushing old Marxian critiques of capitalism while claiming to be advocating for a new social order. And before you think the word Marxian is hyperbole, no, he actually claims to explain the current financial crisis from a Marxian perspective. However, as we shall see, he bases his entire argument on flawed facts that I will disprove based on objective census data. Let's begin. He begins by outlining different explanations, or genres as he calls them, for the current financial crisis. Most of these explanations are straw man arguments, as nobody from a free market capitalist perspective has argued them, and nowhere does he even consider talking about how risk was removed from many parts of the economy via government intervention in the markets, nor does he address problems with our monetary policy. Ironically, he implies that we've implemented too much Hayek, and some have argued for more Keynesian economics.
The third genre is to say everybody was obsessed with a false theory. They read too much Hayek and believed in the efficiency of markets, and it's time we actually got back to something like Keynes or...
So after going through all the genres and leaving out all the arguments made by actual free market capitalists, he decides to give a Marxian explanation for the financial crisis.
And I thought to myself, well, what kind of plausible story can I write which is none of the above? Which is one of the things I always think to myself. And it's not hard to do, particularly if you're coming from a Marxist perspective, because, there aren't many people who try to do this analysis from a Marxist perspective.
No, and as we shall see, there aren't many people who attempt to do it because Marxian theory has been proven false so many times in written critiques and in practice that people who argue Marxian theory are usually disqualified from being taken seriously. But let's watch him have a go at it.
You're talking about the internal contradictions of capital accumulation. And maybe I should write a thing about the internal contradictions of capital accumulation and try to figure out the role of crises in the whole history of capitalism and what's specific and special about the crisis this time around. And there were two ways in which I thought I would do that. One was to sort of look at what's happened since 1970s to now. And the thesis there is that in many ways the form of this current crisis is dictated very much by the way we came out of the last one. That the problem back in the 1970s was excessive power of labour in relationship to capital. That therefore the way out of the crisis last time was to discipline labour.
It is true that unions, and I make a distinction between labor and unions by the way, had enormous control in the 70s, and because of the enormous grip that it had on society with large strikes that could shut down the economy, policies were implemented that freed up the markets and reduced overall unemployment. In fact, enormous pensions union members received from companies is proving to be unsustainable today when many companies are going bankrupt and can no longer compete in the global economy. However, what is again ignored here is the impact that monetary policy played in the 1970s stagflation.
And we know how that was done. It was done by offshoring, it was done by, Thatcher and Reagan, and it was done by neoliberal doctrine, it was done all kinds of different ways.
Offshoring, better known as free trade, partly resulted from regulations that made it unprofitable to hire local labor. But the result from free trade, almost unanimously agreed by economists on the left and right, is that all people are better off. In fact, the poverty in India was cut in half in the 1990s as a direct result of these policies. Ironically, Harvey is advocating policies that make everyone poorer.
But by 1985 or 86, the labour question had essentially been solved for capital. It had access to all of the world's labour supplies. Nobody in this particular instance has cited greedy unions as the root of the crisis.
Well, it certainly wasn't the root of the crisis, but as I mentioned earlier, union pensions have bankrupted many companies or made them uncompetitive. Also, public sector unions have almost destroyed states like California and New Jersey.
Nobody in this instance is saying it has anything to do with excessive power of labour. If anything, it's the excessive power of capital, and in particular the excessive power of finance capital, which is the root of the problem. Now, how did that happen? Well, we've been, since the 1970s, in a phase of what we call wage repression, that wages have remained stagnant.
Listen very carefully. He now is going to base his entire theory on the fact that wages have been stagnant, meaning if wages aren't stagnant, his entire theory falls over like a house of cards. Remember at the beginning of this video, I said I could disprove his entire argument by objective data from the census? Watch me do it. If I go to the government census data to look up real income, There are two pertinent choices, one for people and one for households. I'll go over the differences in just a minute. If I click on people, it opens up an Excel spreadsheet for the datasets, and what anyone observing can see right away is that the real income per capita is close to doubling over that time period where we just heard it's supposed to be stagnating or even declining. You'll get the same result if you go to the Economic Report of the President 2010. You'll see that real disposable income per capita is close to doubling during the period that we're told income should be stagnating or even declining. That doesn't even include employee benefit packages. This begs the question, why have we heard so often that wages have stagnated or declined? Because household income has stagnated. It's individual income that's increased. Look at the data here. You can see household income on the datasets is stagnant over the years. What's the difference? Well, household size has decreased over that same time period. Here is Thomas Sowell on Uncommon Knowledge explaining this concept brilliantly.
One of the real fallacies that runs through a lot of talk about income is confusing statistical categories with actual flesh and blood people. Households are of different sizes. They vary over time. They vary from one group to another. They vary from one income level to another. So, for example, there are 39 million people in the bottom 20% of households and 64 million in the top 20%. So you're saying, yes, 24 million additional people do tend to have more money. The household thing is really a tip-off, I think. Whenever I see somebody quoting household income, he's trying to make things look bad. You know.
It's as simple as that. All right.
Yes.
All right. There's a rule of life.
Yes. For example, over a period of about 30 years, the household income rose by only 6%. Over those same years, per capita income rose by 51%. Because the number of people per household was declining all the while.
I see. I see.
And when you're comparing income brackets, the number of working people in the top 20% is some multiple of the number of working people in the bottom 20%.
So that there are less and less being paid out in wages. Well, wages turn out to be also the money which buys goods. So if you diminish wages, then you've got a problem with where's your demand going to come from?
Well, now that this entire theory has been debunked by one statistic, the rest is totally bogus, but I guess we'll continue for fun, shall we?
And the answer was, well, get out your credit cards. We'll give everybody credit cards. So we'll overcome, if you like, the problem of effective demand by actually pumping up the credit economy.
There was no mass conspiracy to give people credit cards. Despite the fact that some people take on too much debt, lines of credit have allowed people to purchase goods and services when they desperately need them, and overall it's benefited society.
And American households, British households, have all roughly tripled their debt over the last 20, 30 years. And a vast amount of that debt, of course, has been within the housing market. And out of this comes a theory which is very, very important, that capitalism never solves its crisis problems. It moves them around geographically. And what we're seeing right now is a geographical movement of that. Everybody says, well, okay, everything's beginning to recover in the United States, and then Greece goes bang.
Greece went bang because it attempted to implement a social welfare state that didn't produce enough to fund it, so it went bankrupt. Many other countries will follow this trend, but it has nothing to do with free market capitalism. And then his entire argument culminates with him being envious of people who make a lot of money via innovation. Let's listen.
There are two things about this. One is there are a number of barrier points in here. How is the money got together in the right place at the right time in the right volume? And that takes financial ingenuity.
It also takes the price system and the profits and loss system to coordinate it all. But let's ignore those concepts for the moment.
So the whole history of capitalism has been about financial innovation. And financial innovation has the effect of also empowering the financiers. And the excessive power of the financiers can sometimes, they do get greedy, no question about it.
It is good that people who make money for others get wealthy. And greed has been around for thousands of years and will always be with us. The problem of this financial crisis is that government intervention removed the risk from the economic system that would otherwise prevent financial innovators from making overly risky and poor decisions.
Any sensible person right now would join an anti-capitalist organization.
So though capitalism had nothing to do with the crisis, and he bases his theory on the false assumption that wages have declined, Now we're all going to be anti-capitalist.
And you have to. Because otherwise we're going to have the continuation. And notice it's a continuation of all sorts of negative aspects. For instance, the racking up of wealth. You would have thought the crisis would have stopped that. Actually, more billionaires emerged in India last year than ever.
Well, isn't that rich, pardon the pun? Wealth is now a problem in of itself. In fact, the reason India has more billionaires than ever is because India has been bringing itself out of poverty via free trade, which Harvey so despises.
They doubled last year. The wealth of the rich, I just read something this morning, in this country has accelerated. Just last year, what happened was the leading hedge fund owners got personal remunerations of $3 billion each.
This is no longer an economic theory about the financial crisis. This is Harvey complaining about being envious of others. Those people made that much money because other people were willing to pay them that much, because they made those people a lot of money. Sure, I'd like to make that much money, but my economic state in this world is not worse off because others are rich. If that were true, America would be the poorest place on earth because we have the most number of billionaires.
In 1 year. Now, I thought it was obscene and insane a few years ago when they got 250 million. But they're now hauling in 3 billion. Now, that's not a world I want to live in, and if you want to live in it, be my guest.
Actually, Harvey, I do want to live in a society where people are allowed to make as much money as they want based on what people agree to pay them. It's called liberty.
I don't see us debating and discussing this. I don't have the solutions. I think I know what the nature of the problem is.
Well, simply pointing out a perceived problem doesn't do much good, does it? In fact, that is the very problem with Marxism in the first place. It is not that it hasn't been implemented right when it is tried, it is that it cannot actually be implemented.
Nothing is easier than to prove that something human has imperfections. I'm amazed how many people devote themselves to that task.
And unless we're prepared to have a very broad-based discussion that gets away from, the normal kind of pablum you get in the political campaign and, everything's going to be okay here next year if you vote for me, it's crap. You should know it's crap and say it is. And we have a duty, it seems to me, those of us who are academics and seriously involved in the world, to actually change our mode of thinking.
Although I have some agreement that simply electing someone new doesn't solve the problem, but the problem isn't capitalism, and having academics pontificate about Marxism certainly isn't the solution. Overall, the only thing that is crap is Harvey's Marxian argument, and there, I've said it. But let's see how this video then zooms into a guy in a jail cell. You tell me whether or not it is implying to throw capitalists in jail as a new way of thinking.